It's no question that Florida has become a poster child state for the modern conservative movement. Between President Trump calling the state home and the national notoriety received by Florida's own Governor DeSantis, the state has really made a name for itself for its high-profile residents, but also the policy that has come along with them. At the time of making this video, President Trump is back in office and Governor DeSantis is preparing to pass the torch to a new governor as his own governorship reaches its conclusion. But with Florida having crafted such a successful political system for itself, and discussions rising as to whether or not the Florida model should be transplanted to other states or the federal government as a whole, it seems only right that we do a bit of comparing and contrasting. We'll specifically be weighing the achievements of the first Trump administration, as well as his second term up to this point, against the achievements of the DeSantis administration as they assumed office within 2 years of each other, faced many similar circumstances during their tenures, and stand as probably two of the most prominent Floridians in America today. We will be rating Florida and Washington across 5 key topics, beginning with cost of living. We might say Florida is starting off with an unfair advantage. Following in the footsteps of the very economically successful Rick Scott administration, Florida is inheriting a well-running machine that spent 8 years cutting taxes, attracting business, driving population growth, and getting unemployment down. Contrast that with Washington, where America was transitioning away from 8 years of Democratic leadership and all the global economic entanglements that come with it. Even so, Florida's economic success was a double-edged sword that created new cost of living pressures, with housing demand surpassing supply, which was made no easier by the state's notorious high insurance costs, a consequence of living in a state regularly rocked by tropical storms. Despite Trump's hurdles during his first term, he successfully reduced inflation to extremely low levels and built high consumer confidence, and upon his return to office, once again dealing with the aftermath of a less than successful Democratic administration, Trump is slowly but surely bringing costs down, even despite tariff measures which many incorrectly feared would cause prices to skyrocket. While Florida might boast more economic stability, the point for cost of living ultimately goes to Trump and Washington. President Trump's first term rode hard on law and order messaging and a firm stance of cracking down on illegal immigration. However, the reality is that despite Trump's efforts, he was repeatedly stalled and impeded by Democrats, rhinos, and bad actors. Enforcement did ramp up, more illegal aliens were arrested and processed, and some crime indicators improved in parts of the country, but it still fell short of the tidal wave of reform many of his supporters expected. Florida, however, without major barriers or bad actors to interfere with law enforcement efforts, has succeeded in bringing crime down to a 50-year low, and when it comes to immigration enforcement, has successfully implemented several measures to deter and apprehend illegal aliens. From widespread utilization of E-Verify to the expansion of interdiction stations and inspection checkpoints, to the 287G program, to, of course, the famous alligator Alcatraz. While Trump has certainly made greater strides and seen larger law enforcement and immigration enforcement successes in his second term, for sheer consistency and effectiveness of operations, this point goes to Florida. Once again, we find Florida leading with an almost unfair advantage. Florida has been the leader in parental choice and education reform in the United States, having ranked first place for educational freedom according to various sources. I guess it's also not so fair that education is supposed to be a state matter rather than a federal matter, but that hasn't stopped the Department of Education from meddling in state affairs all these years. Trump did take a firm rhetorical stance against woke curriculums, teachers' unions, and DEI, but at the end of the day, he was very restrained by what he actually could do, especially with Congress blocking his federal school choice bills. Things would change during his second term as he's officially set about dismantling the Department of Education to push authority back to the states, but this is probably why we have to give the point to Florida. Not only do Washington's education achievements under Trump mainly come from pushing policy back to the states, but it's also what Florida has done for education in-state that makes this a clear Florida win. Universal school choice vouchers, expansion of charter schools, increased scholarship funding, crackdown on gender ideology and DEI, transparency and accountability of teachers to parents, and much, much more. Point, Florida. Florida under DeSantis runs the classic high-growth, low-tax model with almost textbook precision. No income tax, light regulation, and steady deregulatory action have kept the state's economic engine roaring. Florida's private sector job growth routinely outpaces the national rate, unemployment stays below U.S. levels, and domestic migration has turned Florida into one of the country's most powerful economic magnets. But rapid growth brings friction. Housing costs, insurance crisis, and infrastructure strain are the predictable side effects of being a boom state. Still, as a standalone economy, Florida is fast, efficient, and business-friendly. Trump's economy works on an entirely different scale. His first term delivered low inflation, strong markets, and major corporate tax reform. His current term leans heavily into economic nationalism. Tariffs, onshoring, strategic federal stakes in industry. It's a model designed to reshape how the entire country competes globally. Inflation is stabilizing but remains sticky. Tariffs boost leverage but introduce an element of unpredictability, and labor markets are forced to adapt to the crackdown on illegal migrant labor, creating new jobs for Americans but also running a tighter budget without cheap foreign labor. Trump is playing on a much larger scale with far more moving parts, while Florida's moves are streamlined and state-contained. Washington's policies under Trump are a long-term play aimed not just at raising the GDP or lowering unemployment, but transforming America into a self-sufficient global economic titan once again. For that ambition, the scale of these plans, and the success with which they've been carried out, the point goes to D.C. Florida under DeSantis has turned medical freedom into a permanent governing philosophy, one aimed at limiting the power of state medical boards, protecting physicians who dissent from federal guidelines, blocking broad public health mandates, and pushing for transparency in medical risk communication. In short, Florida created a public health model where the default is personal choice, not institutional control. Trump's Washington has embraced the same ideological direction, but on a much larger and more resistant battlefield. In his second term, he's aimed squarely at dismantling the federal public health establishment, restructuring the CDC and NIH, cutting funding pipelines, and installing leadership that rejects the old model that's kept Americans sick. DC's biggest asset here is probably Trump's HHS Secretary RFK Jr. and his MAHA movement, pushing for physical fitness, medical autonomy, and clean food and drugs. Trump's recent achievements in bringing pharmaceutical costs down for Americans might just be what's put him over the top. But with a close tie, I'll leave it to you. Who do you think governed better? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This has been Michelle Vesserina with Florida's Voice. I hope you'll like the video if you've enjoyed it and subscribe for more.